spousal visa. So this kind of visa is for husbands or wives of somebody who's already in Canada. Let me just put it that way. So if your husband is in Canada, if your wife is in Canada, and that person is a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident, they can sponsor your application. I know a guy that, and the beauty of the spousal visa, especially if your spouse who is in Canada, if that spouse is a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident, you don't need to go through all this stress of IELTS, proof of fund, and all those things. You don't need all those. If your spouse is in Canada and that spouse is sponsoring your application, it may take a while, because I know it takes like a year or even 18 months sometime for it to go through, but you don't need to go through the stress of IELTS and all those things, provided there's a legitimate document to show that you guys are married, because the government takes a longer time, takes a critical look at this application, because you know people do a lot of arranged marriage just because they want to move to Canada. They pay somebody to do a lot of things for them. So that's why the application process takes longer, because they want to really be so sure that you guys are really, really married. So I know a guy who came from Sierra Leone when I was still living in rural Canada. He came from Sierra Leone. He was fortunate to meet a girl. The girl came to Africa to volunteer. You know, some of these people, they like to travel over the place to volunteer, charity and this. And the girl came to she came to Senegal. This guy lives in Senegal. This guy can speak both French and English. Senegalese speak French majorly. So she went to a church where they speak French, and this guy was an interpreter. So I think when the guy was interpreting, he said something else. One thing led to the other. They fell in love, and the girl came back to Canada. She actually works in the daycare where my son attends, and she told me she met a guy from Africa, Senegal, whatever. I encouraged her to move ahead once she's convinced that's what she wants. She went back to Africa again. They solidified the relationship. They got married. In fact, our parents, our family members left Canada. They went to Senegal to have that marriage. And she stayed back. She got pregnant. She came to Canada to deliver a child. And that's how this guy came to Canada. This guy doesn't speak English. He only understood some Nigerian English. He's a very great fan of Mr. Macaroni and all those things. So he can speak pidgin English, Nigerian type of pidgin English, but he doesn't speak English. It's just now that this guy is beginning to speak English. So you can imagine that there's no way that guy would have been able to come to Canada at all in his life, if not because he was lucky to marry a white lady who came to volunteer in Senegal at the time. So that's automatically gave him permanent residency. And that's why I said this one leading to PR. There's another spousal visa for spouses of international students that does not lead to PR. So if you are an international student, for example, you got an admission to University of New Brunswick and you are there, and because you are married in Nigeria, your wife later joins you, maybe your children later join you. While you are studying, your wife can work full time. So she doesn't need to apply for visiting visa from Nigeria. She will need to apply for a work permit visa, spousal work permit from Nigeria. So she doesn't need to do IELTS and every other thing. But that only leads to temporary resident, because she's attached to your application as a student. And because you are also a temporary resident, she will also be a temporary resident. Or because you are also a temporary resident, he will be a temporary resident. But the advantage is that while you are schooling and you can only work 20 hours per week, she or he can work full time to support you. And that is I've done that for so many people. Many of them, some of them, you have seen them, you have had their testimony on my website. And that is a very, very great way for international students to bring their families to Canada. And very soon, before you know it, if you find yourself in a place like Manitoba, 6 months after your spouse has worked full time, she can apply for a provincial nomination, and probably even before you graduate from your school, the whole family can become permanent residents. So that's how the spousal visa part of it works.